Hi, and welcome to this AQA A-Level Business revision video focusing on 3.3.4, making marketing decisions. We started working our way into the marketing mix. This is video 2 of the marketing mix series where we're going to look at product. If you haven't watched the introduction video, please go back and watch that. I'll link it down below. A quick reminder that my teaching here is separate to any and all of my teaching and consultation roles in any and all academies up and down the country. My name's Mr. Giles. Let's get down to business. Okay, first up in these 7 Ps is product. And we always do product first because it's really where we start our journey. Now, remember, before we've done all of these marketing decisions, all this marketing thinking, we have conducted our market research and we've done our segmentation, our targeting and our positioning. So the business now hopefully has lots of data on what customers actually want. Now it's their job to create a good or a service, and I've put it over there, a good or a service that is going to meet the needs of the customers. However, before they've moved too far forward into that, there is a decision to be made. And I've used 2 kind of like fancy words on the board here, but essentially what they're alluding to is style and substance. So I've called them aesthetics and ergonomics. Aesthetics is what does the product or service look like actually with your eyeballs? And then ergonomics is does the good or service do what it's supposed to do? Okay. Now, I used an iPhone in my previous example. If we're honest, the iPhone is a beautiful looking phone, and that's its kind of competitive advantage. They're always very pretty. They always look really stylish. They put a lot of thought, even down to the box itself, the packaging, the way it's opened, the feel of the materials, all those things. Is the iPhone the best phone? Now, listen, I don't want to create some sort of comment war in the bits down below. Although, if you could absolutely plow my videos with comments, that would be great for the algorithm, wouldn't it? Okay, but arguably, I think the Android phones are better in terms of their feasibility or what they do. Now, listen, I'm not trying to start any sort of battle, but you can either agree or disagree with that. But that seems to be the general consensus amongst my students anyway. So the Android is a somewhat better phone in terms of what it can do, but the iPhone is a somewhat better phone in terms of what it looks like. Now, those things are marginal, very marginal, okay? And they come down to personal preference too. So it would appear that Apple have put more thought into their aesthetics and Android have put, specifically Samsung, have put more thoughts into their ergonomics. And that's completely fine. It's okay to have a product that does the thing it needs to do very well and not be beautiful. And vice versa. It's okay to have beautiful things that actually aren't very fit for purpose. And there's loads of examples of that. Okay. You can look at, say, like fashion, for example, or films, things like that. Okay. There's loads of examples. Let's not get too much into it now. So you make your decisions. Are you going more style or more substance, maybe in the middle, and then you create your product or your service. And that should be based around market research. That's your first marketing decision. Now you move into what's called the product lifecycle. The product lifecycle is a way that we measure where a product is in its life, but we only do one product at a time. Now, what happens is, and when we'll kind of spin through it here, right? What happens is we do a lot of research and development. I've put it down here. Hopefully you can see it. R&D. We do research and development. That's our market research. And we create our product, this bit. And then we launch our product. And that's where 0 is. We launch that product. Okay. The first thing we have to consider before we get anywhere else is, why did we launch this new product? What was the influence on launching this new product? So today I'm enjoying a very tasty fizzy beverage called Dr. Pepper Zero Cherry Crush. Okay, now if you've had one, hopefully you'll agree it's very tasty. My question is, why did we need that? What was the need for that? Who asked for that? Because whoever they are, I want to shake their hand because it's delicious. But why did we need that? What was the decision? Right now, maybe the fine people over at the Coca-Cola company identified that they wanted people to drink more Dr. Pepper, and we'll get onto that in a minute. Okay, so here we go. We launch our product and we have what's called the introduction phase. Now, along the bottom, I've got time. Up the side, I've got sales here. This is a generic product lifecycle. They don't all look like this. The introduction phase is generally the first 30 days when products and services are launched, and you have what are called early adopters. These are the customers who have been waiting for this product with bated breath. They're stood outside the shops, all that kind of nonsense, and they can't wait to buy it. Everybody else, a little bit skeptical, just waiting. What do people think? What are the reviews? But sales do rise rapidly because obviously they start at zero. So the intro phase always looks quite aggressive. Then we get into this G, this growth phase. And this phase can last an undetermined amount of time. And it's when sales of the products rise the most rapidly. Not necessarily they make the most money, but sales rise most aggressively in this phase. And really, you want to keep your product in the growth phase as long as possible because a rise in sales means that you are selling to lots of people and or you're getting lots of repeat custom. That's what you want. Now, if we use my iPhone example, that's not repeat custom, that's just new customers. But go back to my Dr. Pepper example, if we're in an aggressive growth phase, it means people are coming back to drink it again and again. So sales rise aggressively in that period of time. However, all products enter what's called a maturity phase. And this is a phase where sales start to even out and you don't gain too many new customers, or the amount of customers buying that product every day more or less remains the same. And you can see there it kind of peaks in the middle and starts to kind of tail off at the end. The tail off at the end in this bit, let me just be very specific here, is often referred to as saturation. The market gets saturated with this product. It becomes bored with it. Okay. And then two things happen. Okay. There's a choice to be made. The product either enters what's called the decline phase, where sales start to taper off and inevitably crash out back down to zero, or the business chooses to do what's called an extension strategy, ES, an extension strategy. Now, going back to my Dr. Pepper Cherry Crush, that I feel is an extension strategy because they've taken an original product, Dr. Pepper Zero, they've whacked a new ingredient in it, stuck a different label on it, and then they're selling it to me. It's exactly the same bottle. You'd be forgiven for mistaking them on the shelf, but it's suddenly piqued interest. So what I think has happened is Dr. Pepper Zero has found its way to here, sales have started to decline, and then the Coca-Cola company are not quite ready to let that go yet, and they're trying to boost interest back in it by adding a new feature to it. Okay. Now, the best example of extension strategies is the iPhone, because the original iPhone launched all the way back in 2004 and it's still called the iPhone now. It's not a new model. It's just called the iPhone. And then they add a number, which means it's the iteration of that. So we're up to, I want to say 16 now. I'm sorry, I'm not really clued up with it. But that is 16 extension strategies on that product. Okay. If you look at cars, for example, if you ask your parents about cars, they might be a similar age to me, maybe. They might remember cars like the Ford Escort and the Ford Sierra. We went through 5 or 6 what we call marks of those, Mark 1, Mark 2. Go and ask your parents about the Mark 1 and Mark 2 Escorts. If anyone's into cars, your parents go mad for those, right? So there were iterations of that. That's the extension strategy, to keep that product alive. We've made some changes and we're going to go again. Now, why is the product lifecycle useful? Well, if we know where our product is on the lifecycle, we can make marketing decisions better. Now, remember, my marketing mix, is an interdependent plan. So decisions that I make on my product will have a knock-on effect to the entire plan. Now, you have to be careful here, folks, because each product requires a slightly different plan. But you're probably going to assume this, right? Let me just give you a few general rules. When are you going to do most of your promotion, i.e., TV, social media, whatever? Probably down this end of the world, right? Maybe a little bit here, but probably down here. When are you going to be doing the most kind of pricing decisions, i.e., really, really low or really, really high or something like that? Again, probably down this end of the road, all right? When are you going to be trying to reduce the amount of money being spent on marketing and trying to soak up as much revenue as possible? Probably down that end. Okay. And then when you get to here, you have to make that marketing decision of whether or not you're going to extend your life cycle or not. Now, each life cycle is very different. Some life cycles last a very long time. So the Mars bar, for example, I could be wrong, but I feel like we're getting up to 50 years of the Mars bar now. Disneyland Paris, they've had 30 years. These are just things off the top of my head that I know. Okay, the iPhone, again, has been going since 2004, so that's 21 years. All right. However, there have been some products that have come and gone very quickly. So something to you might remember, and again, if you're watching this in next year, maybe not, but fidget spinners. How long did they last? That was like less than a school year, wasn't it? I remember dealing with them in September, and then by March they were gone. All right. So each product has a life cycle, and as a business, you have to be ahead of the game to make sure you're making the right marketing decisions based on where you are. Because if you try and do a crazy pricing strategy in the middle of maturity, you might either launch a product into an early decline or give it another little boost. Who knows? But you have to be careful. That's the product life cycle, and it's for one singular product. The problem being is that most businesses sell more than one singular product. So now we're going to have a look at what's called the Boston Matrix, which helps us make marketing decisions in a product portfolio situation when we have more than one product. Let's have a look at that. So the product lifecycle is very handy for making marketing decisions if you've got one product. The disadvantage of the product lifecycle as well is that it doesn't really consider the external environment too much. So we have to be considerate of that. That was a 25 marker a long time ago. Just be careful for that question. A different way, not necessarily a better, but a different way of making marketing decisions is to use what's called the Boston Matrix. Now, the Boston Matrix considers a business that has multiple products, and its axes are very different. It looks at the difference between market growth and market share. Let me define those terms. It's important you understand them. Market growth is how many new customers are joining this market. And what that means is that it's a market where brand new customers who were never part of that market before are starting to join. So if we use our mobile phone example, we like to think that everybody has a mobile phone. There are 8 billion people on this planet. Let's say 7 billion of them are going to use a mobile phone of some description. Not all 7 billion have a mobile phone. Probably less than half of that. I want to say there's only 2 billion mobile phone users in the world. So there are a potential 5 billion people who could join the mobile phone market. Now, if you're wondering where they are, they're in the outskirts of the world where they don't have phone signal and technology, etc. So we could get them to join the mobile phone market. So these are brand new customers to the market that don't yet engage in any of the products that are available on that market. Market share, however, is how many customers who are already in our market buy from us. And if we go back to my Apple and Samsung example, hopefully the comments are not too hateful down below. It's about a 50-50 split off the top of my head. I want to say it's a little bit more in Apple's favor nowadays, but I could be wrong. But that's market share. So if I did a collective with my classroom and I said to the students in front of me, you know, who's got an Apple, they'd put their hands up, who's got an Android, they put their hands up, and we could look at the market share in that room. It'd be very unlikely in a classroom for me to find anybody who's not in the mobile phone market. If I went out onto the street, I could do that and maybe find customers who aren't in the mobile phone market. So market growth is getting new customers to join my market. Market share is trying to get a share of all the customers that are currently in that market and get them to buy from us. And I like to think of it as stealing from our competitors. Now, let me ask you this question, give you a think for a second. What do you think would be easier? To convince somebody who's not in that market to join that market, or to steal a customer from one of your competitors? Now, let me give you some scenarios. How easy do you think it would be to convince somebody who's never used a mobile phone to join the mobile phone market? And if you're Apple, not only join the mobile phone market, but buy an Apple. Or do you think it would be easier to convince a Samsung user to buy an Apple? What do you think would be easier? Okay, again, maybe put it down below. Or here's a different example. What do you think would be easier? Trying to convince somebody who drinks Coke to drink Pepsi, or try and get new people into the fizzy drink market? Because I actually think the answer to that's slightly different. If we think about that for a moment, who doesn't drink fizzy drinks? Kids and maybe old people. Do you think parents want kids, like young kids, drinking a fizzy drink? No. But could we convince a Pepsi drinker to drink Coke? Maybe, because they're already in that market and they're very similar. So you get the general idea here. Okay. So market share, market growth. We then take our product portfolio and then we plot it on this graph. And this is done by low and high. So this is a numerical system. Okay. We just use the labels of low and high. If we've got products that have low market share in what would be considered a low growth market, so this isn't a thriving market, it's actually a dying market, and our product isn't even very popular in that dying market, we would have what's called a dog product. Now, these have all got strange names for a reason, and I'll explain, but I will apologize in advance because this is a bit of a, this used to be called other things back in the 90s when I learned it, and the names were much more sinister, but they stuck with dog. My question is this. What do you do with an old dog? Okay. You either let it live out its life peacefully and die naturally, or you put the dog down. Okay. I know, horrendous. Sorry if I've triggered anyone. But that's why we call it a dog product. Because if you've got a product that's in a low growth market, i.e. it's a dying market, and your product isn't even very popular, you have a choice to make. Do you just stop making the product altogether, i.e. put it down, or do you let that product just carry on and naturally fade out over time of its own accord? Well, that all depends on whether or not that product is costing you money or making you money. Go with Apple products. Maybe we've got the iPod Shuffle. Can't imagine that's a growing market. Can't imagine that's a big product for them. They could just call it a day and shut that down, but apparently some people are still buying it, so they're probably still selling it and making a little bit of revenue. Now, do they advertise? Do they do any promotion, price, any of that stuff for the iPod Shuffle? No. And that's the right decision to make. If you've got a dog product, you're not making marketing decisions. The only decision you're making is to let it go of its own accord or call it a day. So that's a dog product. Up next, we have what's called a question mark. It used to be called something very more sinister than that. And the reason it's a question mark is because this product is actually in a high growth market, i.e. this market is growing very rapidly. So think mobile phone market, it's a rapid growing market. However, for some reason, our product doesn't have high market share. All right. Now, I'm not throwing shade at anyone, and I apologize to the Chinese government in advance, but this might be the Huawei phone. Okay. If I did a consensus in the room of people who've got mobile phones, there's always, one kind of young person who's got a Huawei, maybe. There's a very small amount of the market share. So if you're Huawei and you're in the mobile phone market, you're going to be asking yourself that question. Why won't people buy our products? This is a market where loads of new people are joining. And when they join, for some reason, they've got no opinions when they join that market because they've not been in that market before. They still don't buy our product. So the marketing decision here at the question mark is, well, hang on, is our advertising effective? Are we giving the right image across? Is there something happening with our people in our stores? Is our aesthetics or our ergonomics off? We have to let's do more research to find out why we can't get market share. Now, you might be thinking, well, sir, it's because we've got Apple and Samsung. Yeah, I get you. But if you went to the far reaches of Indonesia somewhere and found somebody who's never seen a mobile phone before, apparently they're still picking an Apple phone, even though they've got no general idea of the mobile phone market. You've got to question that. That's a question mark. Top right hand corner, we have high market share and high market growth. This is a star product. This is your Samsung Galaxy Bing Bang Bong. I don't know what they're called. Sorry, folks. I'm an Apple man. Your Apple iPhone 17 XL Plus, whatever. Okay. This is the one. This is the one that's really growing. It's going really fast. And this is the one you're probably throwing loads of money at in terms of marketing budget and marketing decisions. So you're going to keep a really steady eye on its product life cycle and make sure you're making very intelligent marketing decisions here. That's probably taken up a lot of your money. Okay. And then lastly, we have what's called a cash cow. Now, a cash cow is a product that you want to milk for revenue. That's why it's called a cow, right? You want to milk for revenue because it's got a very high market share in what appears to be a somewhat steady market. So this to me would be something on the lines of like original Coca-Cola. Now, I could be wrong, but like full sugar Coca-Cola. Is the full sugar market growing? No. Is it steadily declining? Yeah, kind of, I think. However, they still seem to be selling lots and lots of original Coca-Cola, and they don't really do a lot of advertising for it. They'll do adverts for Coke Zero and all the different flavors and stuff, but generally you get one advert a year. It's usually at Christmas. It's polar bears drinking Coke. Great. Okay. And that's it. That's all you really get. And they just milk the life out of that product. They take that revenue and then they put it into the other products. They put it into the stars and then potentially the question marks. So you just milk that and you tend to just try not to make too many expensive marketing decisions. And I'll use an example that I used earlier in the video, but look at, say, maybe the Mars bar or the Snickers. When was the last time you really saw an advert for a Mars bar? Because in my lifetime, I think I've seen 2 or 3. So they're not really kind of doing much in the way of marketing there, but that seems to be making them still a significant amount of money. Makes up the entire tin of celebrations apparently in this day and age. So the last thing to consider is this, the question mark. What do you do with it? Do you take money from your cash cow and put it into the question mark to try and turn it into a star? Or do you leave it and let it become a dog product in its own time and let it go? Simultaneously, do you put money into your dog product to try and make it a cash cow? Because if your market isn't growing, it doesn't mean it's necessarily declining. It might just be a steady market with a steady group of customers. And for some reason, your product just isn't popular in that market. So do you put marketing time and money into it to try and make it into a cash cow? Well, these are the questions you have to ask yourself. These are the marketing decisions you have to ask yourself. And again, we come back to those influences of money, external environment, etc., etc. So that's product under the marketing mix. We looked at things like ergonomics, aesthetics, we looked at the product lifecycle, and we've looked at the importance of the Boston matrix. Join me in the next video where we're going to look at price.